On behalf of President Donald Lofi, the trustees, faculty, and staff of Westminster College, and on behalf of the Association of Churchill Fellows and the Mid-Missouri Friends of America's National Churchill Museum Board of Directors, I'm pleased to welcome you to this morning's ceremony in remembrance of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. This morning, as we gather to remember and recall the life and legacy of Her Majesty, we do so in a time-honored ceremony and in a place that has had its share of history, pageantry, and pomp. For nearly 850 years, this magnificent building has stood, fallen, and risen repeatedly in London and here in Fulton. On this day, as the world watches the funeral services of Her Majesty the Queen at Westminster Abbey, we assemble at another Westminster, Westminster College, where the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom is a constant and profound presence. Today's ceremony is replete with symbolism, which no doubt would be familiar to the Queen. The presence here of the regalia of the Royal Order of the Garter, the highest order of British knighthood, would look familiar. Queen Elizabeth II was the sovereign of the Garter, and it was the Queen who appointed Sir Winston Churchill to its order in 1953. Familiar, too, would be the Lord Mayor's sword, just now completed in a ceremony where it rests in its stand for the first time in a decade. As tradition dictates, the practice of setting aside the sword was rooted in the medieval practice of men laying down their swords in a prominent place at the front of the church so that no fighting would erupt during the service. In keeping with that tradition, I trust there will be no brawling here today. In England, when the monarch enters the City of London on an official state visit, they are welcomed by the Lord Mayor of London with the pearl sword, which then they touch. The sovereign touches its hilt, and it is meant to be a representation of his or her authority over the city. Queen Elizabeth II participated in this ceremony countless times, including during her Diamond Jubilee and at the funeral of former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who was inducted into the Association of Fellows here at Westminster College in 1996. Our Lord Mayor's sword was given by the Worshipful Company of Cutlers, the ancient British Guild, with the directive that it only be used on special ceremonial occasions. Today is such an occasion. So as we reflect on the long life of Queen Elizabeth and look back at her historic reign, from her time as a newly coronated queen 70 years ago to the elder stateswoman who welcomed her 15th prime minister only 2 days before her death, we are reminded that enduring institutions are comprised of individuals that contribute to their history, and that occasionally and remarkably, history produces an individual that becomes an institution.
I would like to pause for a moment to remember an old Prime Minister and a young Queen. Churchill's first known comments about the future Queen Elizabeth II were made in a letter to his wife, Clementine, on September 25, 1928, when he was staying with the royal family at Balmoral Castle. Churchill wrote, "There is no one here except the family, the household, and Queen Elizabeth, age 2. The last is a character. She has an air of authority and reflectiveness, astonishing in an infant." While Churchill knew young Elizabeth was, or would be, a princess, and certainly not in line for the throne, his prescience to call the 2-year-old queen was uncanny. Years later, in 1955, in his final toast as Prime Minister, he saluted his sovereign. Churchill said, "Never have the august duties which fall upon the British monarch been discharged with more devotion than the brilliant opening to your Majesty's reign. We thank God for the gift he has bestowed upon us and vow ourselves anew to the sacred cause. and wise and kindly way of life of which your Majesty is the young, gleaming champion.
This lady whom we crown was born when buds were green upon the thorn, and earliest cowslips showed when still unseen by mortal eye, one cuckoo told his, "Who am I?" And over little glints of sky, in rain pools whence the trickles flowed, the small snipe clattered wing. The swallows were upon the road, naught but the cherry blossoms snowed. The promise was on all fields sowed of earth's beginning spring. Now that we crown her as our queen, may love keep all her pathways green. May sunlight bless her days, may the fair spring of her beginning ripen to all things worth the winning. The very surest of our praise that mortal men attempt. May this old land revive and be again a star set in the sea, a kingdom fit for such as she, with glories yet undreamt.
I think I'm tall enough, I'm not sure. It was such an honor back in 1953 when my grandfather said, "I've made arrangements for you and your grandmother to sail on the Queen Mary for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth." And I was 14 or 15 years old. And it was a thrilling experience. And when they were saying on the news today, or in the last week since she died, that the coronation was 14 months after her father had died and she became queen. And in seeing and being there, I can understand why it took them that long to get it all ready. The coronation coach was the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen. And it was a little cloudy day, not bad, but a little cloud. But after all the troops and the various military and everybody went through, and then came this just glowing, I've never seen anything as luminous as the coronation coach. And if you're ever back in London or anywhere close to London, you must go to the Royal Mews at Buckingham Palace, and that's where it's stored along with some other coaches. And it's open to the public, and see this just unbelievable thing. And the Queen herself, the glass that goes around it was low enough that you could see her sitting. It wasn't just that you just could see her head and her shoulders. You could really see the Queen. And through all the years and everything that she did, she was always going to be, I think, remembered just as the Queen. And I think you'll enjoy seeing some of the things they have downstairs. And they have, I believe, a small replica of the coronation coach. So you must find it, and you'll all enjoy seeing it. And thank you so much for coming. I know it would make Her Highness very happy. Thank you.
I would like to pause for a moment to recall a new Prime Minister and an old Queen. Elizabeth Truss, the Queen's 15th and final Prime Minister, was born more than 100 years after Winston Churchill's birth. Liz Truss formally became the United Kingdom's Prime Minister when the Queen invited her to form a government in a ceremony at Balmoral Castle on September 6th, 2 days before Her Majesty's death. Upon the news of the Queen's death, the Prime Minister wrote, "We are all devastated by the news we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty, the Queen, is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Today, the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, His Majesty, King Charles III. With the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support them, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country. Exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
The late Queen Elizabeth was the sovereign for the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth of Nations. Her leadership was steadfast, principled, calm, and constant. She lived her life with grace, made all she did about the institution of the monarchy, not herself. And when she entered a room, the whole of the United Kingdom came with her. Today, it seems the world is with her. The Queen, along with members of the royal family, is also with us here at America's National Churchill Museum and Westminster College. She never traveled here personally, but she certainly knew about our work. Naturally, this was because of her admiration for Winston Churchill, her first prime minister. For Churchill, the feeling of admiration was mutual, though Churchill added a healthy dose of awe to his admiration. Upon tendering his resignation to the 29-year-old Queen in 1955, she offered to make Churchill a duke, which would have elevated him to the House of Lords. Churchill later recalled, "You know, I nearly accepted. I was so moved by her beauty and charm and the kindness with which she made the offer. Churchill paused and then continued, "But I finally remembered that I must die in the House of Commons. I must die as I've been." Kindness, charm, beauty. These are the things that struck Churchill about the Queen in that moment. These are the things that will linger as part of the Queen's legacy. The Queen's admiration for Winston Churchill ran deep. She invited him into the Royal Order of the Garter, the highest order of British knighthood. She granted him a state funeral, similar in size and scope to the Queen's own in London today. The admiration and affection for Churchill linked her and the royal family to this special place. When Westminster College in the 1960s had the bold idea to relocate this building, the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, Aldermanbury, from London to Fulton, I can only imagine what the Queen thought of the idea. I can almost hear her in her understated and measured tone say, "They want to do what?" The church, after all, was built and designed by royal architect Christopher Wren. John Milton was married here. Shakespeare, when he resided in London, lived a block away. Why should this church be rebuilt in Missouri? I think the answer to that question is simple. Because Churchill endorsed the idea, calling it an imaginative concept that would stand as a symbol of peace. He knew, and the Queen knew, too, of the importance and historic bond between the United States and Britain. For a queen and a prime minister who had waged and won the Second World War, the thought of enduring peace was both appealing and necessary. This is a monument to that ideal. Over 4,200 miles and 850 years separate this building from its historic foundations. But the principles upon which it is built and for which it stands today are coupled closely together. At the building's dedication in 1969, the Queen could not attend herself, but she sent a member of the royal family. The Earl Mountbatten of Burma, cousin to the Queen and uncle to Prince Philip, attended and presided at the dedication of this place. Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, inscribed a Book of Common Prayer and presented it to the museum. Other letters, artifacts, notes, and the occasional teacup with the Queen's image on it have found their way to the museum's collection. We are fortunate to have these connections. We are fortunate to have these collections. And we are fortunate to preserve the past for future generations so that the ideals they represent become shared history. And today, as we recall the enormous legacy of the late Queen, who is now for the ages and a permanent part of history, we look ahead as King Charles III assumes the mantle from his mother. As we do, we take comfort that the King is also supportive of our work here to continue to sustain and strengthen this special place. King, then Prince Charles, wrote to us in 2019, just 3 years ago, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the museum. Perhaps he said it best. He said, "The church, it seems to me, represents the essence of the human spirit and our ability to overcome tragedy, having quite literally been raised from the ashes of the Great Fire of London in 1666 and brought to life again, 3 centuries later, after its destruction in the Blitz. It therefore gives me great joy that this church stands proudly rehallowed in Fulton, Missouri, as an extraordinary example of resilience and hope. It is my particular wish that the Church will continue to receive the support it needs to sustain its work for future generations. King Charles closed his letter. As Winston Churchill said in 1944, the longer you look back, the farther you can look forward. While there is much work to be done before the future of this uniquely special place can be fully assured, I would like to thank you, and most warmly, for your continuing efforts to protect, preserve, and cherish it. So said King Charles. We will, of course, continue to protect, preserve, and above all, cherish not only this place, but the relationship we enjoy with the royal family. Like this venerable building, Queen Elizabeth was the personification of resilience and hope. For that, we are all grateful. We will close today's ceremony by tolling the bells here at St. Mary the Virgin, Aldermanbury, once in London, for 1 minute in memory of Her Majesty the Queen. Thank you.